China's presence in Africa started growing at the turn of the 21st century when China formulated its going global policy. And this is in the very early days of of going global, where the companies were encouraged to go out and find markets and learn things. So from 2005, 2006 onwards, you saw a really huge growth in terms of trade, investment and loans. So this is where the big increase happened. Actually, just about everything peaked in 2013 when the Belt and Road Initiative was launched. This is very interesting, I find, because it's not like so we're talking about even like the construction companies in Chinese construction companies in Africa, their earnings kind of grew until 2013. It's not like it has gone down after that, but it's just at that level, it's flattened. So there's no BRI effect on China-Africa relations. Rather, it's not like also BRI came and took all the money, so now everything's been going down. No, China has been having strategic relations with African countries for almost 2 decades now. So we have had the Forum on China Cooperation every 3 years for almost 2 decades now. So that arena, the exchanges, where you see almost like, I saw someone writing that, Africa was empty of presidents during the Forum on Africa Cooperation in Beijing because everyone was there. So China already has this firm kind of link established through the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, a platform. So during the Forum on Africa Cooperation last year, quite a number of African companies or countries signed up to the BRI, but that was really recent. And it's only like the countries that would really be more on the geographical road, as it were, Djibouti, Kenya and Ethiopia, that really have projects that are branded as BRI through 2 railway projects. But other than that, I wouldn't say that the BRI really adds something new or changes anything significantly. It's just that it's going global with Xi Jinping characteristics. To paraphrase, Deborah Breutigam has called this globalization with Xi Jinping characteristics. So it's a going global policy. It's more of a vision, and this is what I hear Chinese observers calling it, like a vision, a business plan. And it's under the umbrella of that, a lot of activities can happen. Bigger loans that I've studied for my Ph.D. Research, they are more, well, you wouldn't say they are commercial in the sense that they come at the competitive interest rates at the international market that the countries would have to pay to get that kind of funding, but they are in between aid terms, the soft loans, and real commercial terms. So they are on commercial terms, but not as expensive as they would be if that recipient country would try to go to the market. And very many times countries, for instance Congo, that I've studied would never get access to that kind of funding from the market. Yeah. So just in terms of the loans, that are the kind of loans that can come. They are not aid. They are often brought in by Chinese state-owned companies that have identified, because they're always looking for business, right? The Chinese state-owned companies are in it to find business in African countries. So if they identify a need in an African country, and often this happens through their connections, so they talk to different people and they try to identify needs. They say, okay, we can pitch this to a Chinese bank and see if we can find funding. So the Chinese state-owned company will then go to often China Exim Bank or China Development Bank and say, guys, what do you think about this? Should we try to fund this? And then they will look for some form of collateral, as in some kind of profit-generating venture. That can be a mine, or it can be, well, the airport or cocoa exports or oil, some kind of collateral for that loan. And this is the kind of loans that have received a lot of attention. They are not, they do come in, but it's not like the only facet of what China does in Africa. We often understand popularly, I'd say, and in policy circles, and it's creeping into academia as well, this idea that the Western approach to lending is good, China's approach to lending is rapacious and inherently bad, and they're just trying to trap countries. Whereas what I would argue is that there are different ways of seeing the link between debt, as it were, development finance and development, how they are connected. So the Western view, and that proposed by the IMF, would be that countries should have small debts until their economy has grown so that they can carry more debt. They need to have debt relief before they can take on larger commercial loans. This is the relation for them. Whereas for China, and I see, and this has been now argued by China's, for instance, the Li Rugu, who was for a long time the chair of China Exim Bank, argued this vocally, that he thinks that debt relief doesn't necessarily have to precede development. You can have big loans even if you have, like, you can take on big loans even if you have big loans, because it's the developmental implications and the developmental opportunity that matters. So if a country has developmental opportunities, or if it has a mind to exploit, if it has something to pay off a loan and make it work for the development of the country, it doesn't necessarily have to come at the back of debt relief. So that it's a different way of conceiving what debt is supposed to do for a country. And interestingly, just now at the Belt and Road Forum, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs also put out a policy document for a debt sustainability framework within the BRI, which actually spells out this quite clearly, that even countries in debt distress can take on loans. The key, and I'm not quoting now because I don't have it in front of me, but the gist of it is that it's the reimbursement capacity that matters, not your debt burden. And this is very different from how the IMF views things. And I would say this, it's interesting because we only hear about the one part, and the other one is seen as like something just rapacious, right? As I said. But actually, this is two different ways of viewing it. I think the debt trap narrative, essentially it's about China using debt to entrap other countries in their sphere of influence. So the stereotype goes, China gives country big loan, country cannot pay off big loan, China takes strategic assets from country, country is now a vassal state, to China. That's the narrative. Whereas actually, and oftentimes the example for this is the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. But it's one example out of thousands of Chinese loans that has been given, where the Sri Lankans eventually found their only exit was to offer China to lease this thing, to like get rid of, to solve the situation somehow by offering China to lease it. Chinese bankers have grown a lot more cautious in terms of Africa, and they are very careful in terms of where they lend to. They ask for a lot of guarantees. I think they have done their historical, like they know their historical lessons, what happened to Western loans to Africa in the past. They know. So they are not in it to lose their money and have a big new debt rescheduling. No, they're not losing their money. They are making sure that they're going to get their money back. So, and that is, I think, what is missing in the debt trap narrative. Is like Chinese finances want their money back. They're not interested in debt traps. No, they want good business. So this, I think, really this aspect is missing. And also, I think it kind of portrays Chinese banks as some kind of there's someone just shoving money to never see them again. No, like these are like, oftentimes I would say the top management of these banks, they've been working, they got Harvard degrees, they've been working at the World Bank. I mean, these are bankers, and they are in it for good financing deals.
If this really is China going global with Xi Jinping characteristics, we've seen a trend in China where China has grown more authoritarian. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are worried about this so-called sharp power, with China sort of spreading its authoritarianism across the world, with democracy being on the decline. Do you see Africa as being a part of this, or how is it going for China's influence in Africa increasing? That's of course an overgeneralization to talk about Africa as a whole, but from the cases that you've seen.
Yeah, this is a big debate among scholars as well. And there was one, South Africa is an interesting example of a country that has significant investments in China. And that's the only, like, South Africa's profile is different from the other African countries. It's a big economy and has big investments in China. China also has big investments, is a player in the media sector in South Africa. So there was one columnist in South Africa who criticized China, and then he found himself discontinued, and if I don't know if he had a freelance arrangement or something. And this was like then touted as like, now China, look what's happening. He cannot express his views freely. He was now fired from his job because he criticized China because the newspaper is China owned. And this started really interesting debates within among, in the networks of China-Africa researchers, where, and I don't know this myself, I'm just like, now, I just want to bring this up because it's so interesting. Some people who knows the media, Chinese media presence in Africa, are saying this is just one example. There are so many other Chinese-owned newspapers that simply do not do this. This is one example. You cannot say that this is true for all. It might just be an exception, whereas others argued, look what's happening, look what China's doing, So I think this is we haven't seen a lot of evidence, and I do spend time thinking about that. How would China export authoritarianism? What would that mean? Would they interfere in democratic elections? Would they censor in this way, like if they own media outlets, would they start censoring them? How would that influence play out? And I don't know. I think it's to date, it's an allegation, it's a fear. But I actually don't know how China, if they, I don't think they have that agenda. I don't know why. It would seem very anti-non-interference, if you may. I think China's, if anything that comes to Taiwan or anything that comes to Tibet, China's, yes, they're going to worry. If people say stuff about that, they're going to be touchy. But I don't think, in terms of internal affairs of other countries, I don't see, at least, to date, any empirical evidence of China trying to now turn other countries into authoritarian states. That just doesn't seem like something we have seen any proof of. Because of course, this columnist in South Africa was criticizing China. It wasn't criticizing, the government of South Africa or anything like that. It was related to China, which of course is serious enough. We don't know. I don't know this case. I don't know what happened, but to export authoritarianism, I don't know. I don't see, that having happened, or I don't see how they would do it or why they would do it even. For me, I find myself wanting to nuance the picture of China or the narrative around China. That is not a case of now elite capture of me being some kind of voice for the Chinese government. Not at all. It's just that I'm seeing other things empirically than what I hear in the popular narratives. I've even been accused, when I was, doing fieldwork, I presented to some donors my research. I tried to put this forward, and there were rumors spreading from some of the diplomats that I was pro-China. This is it's a very polarized view. I think it resembles the views and the narrative around Russia and Sweden. It's just very black and white. It's bad and the West is good. And it's this kind of we're not getting anywhere with this kind of narrative. So I think China being sensitive, what you're saying is that critique of Taiwan or Tibet or these kinds of things that are really important to China. But I can also understand the feeling of being misunderstood if I even feel that this is misunderstanding. And I've been interviewing Chinese company representatives, heads of Chinese companies. They would talk to me. I had a Chinese researcher with me a lot of the time. Where I came from the Center for Chinese Studies in South Africa, which meant they were willing to talk to me. They didn't want to talk to NGOs because they said it doesn't matter what we say. They come with an agenda and they go away with an agenda. We're tired. We don't want to talk. We cannot engage.